Awesome. It looks like there's no one else in the wait room. Christina, I'm going to make you co-host just in case once we get started, somebody else pops in. Let me just do that. Awesome. All right, let's get started. Thank you for coming, everyone. We are going to be going over the Victim Service Provider HMIS setup and CES participation. Thank you, Rosa. Thank you, Elizabeth, for coming and jumping on. Awesome. So let's go on to the next slide. We'll just do introductions quickly. If everybody else here wants to jump over on the chat and introduce yourselves, I think our team, we could just do it live just so you know who will be presenting today. So I am Maria Vargas. I am the system admin here at the Coalition, and I'll pass it over to Rebecca.
Good morning, I'm Rebecca Rathmel. I am the manager for the Coalition's Coordinated Entry System. I will pass it to Jenna.
I am Jenna Lutz. I am the data coordinator for the HMIS.
Jenna. Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you, but I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm Jenna Lutz. I'm the data coordinator for the HMIS team.
Awesome, thank you. I don't know if there's something wrong with my chat, but I don't see anybody. There we go. Thank you. So if everybody else could just introduce yourselves in the chat, the organization that you're representing. It'll just be helpful for when it comes down to questions. And of course, we're recording, so any notes, anything that goes on in the chat will be added at the end to this slide deck. That way it's all recorded, answers are recorded, and if something was typed and answered verbally, you'll have the recording and the chat. So all that information is going to be sent out afterwards. So we ask that if you can please remain on camera for questions. Again, we like to put names to faces, so it's just that much more helpful. Okay, so our agenda will be going over victim service provider requirements. We'll be going over funding, as well as data collection, reporting requirements, the point in time count, what that means for your providers, and the CES participation. So we encourage questions. Feel free to stop us. If you want to ask through the chat, we can do that too. We have someone monitoring that. Feel free to put your hands up. I don't know how to use that feature through here, but I can definitely see it. So that's fine too. Just whatever questions you have, feel free to ask them. Okay, so the requirements. Victim service providers are required to submit a new project setup form to HMIS, and that reflects your active program that you currently have going. So the new project setup form, it's basically a Google form. And what that does, it asks a bunch of questions of when your program started, what type of program it is. Essentially, it's what's on your contract. So it should be information that is not unknown to you. And if it is unknown, it's a good place to go to get those questions answered too. So anything that's asked on that Google form should be already listed on your contract. Every project that you have should be reflected in HMIS. So going forward, if there's any new funding, those forms should be submitted to our team. If you know for a fact right now that there's an active program that's not entered in HMIS, that is an issue. We do need to have those forms submitted for every active program under your agency. So victim service providers that receive COC or CHS funding are required to collect and report on data according to the HUD 2022 data standards. We'll go over essentially what that means in slides. so you'll get that visual of what the 2022 data standards are. And then we do break them up for each program as well, with each program type. So emergency shelter might not look the same as rapid rehousing program because it's two different program types, two different data requirements are required to be collected. The next important piece is that the HMIS lead is responsible to work with each comparable database to ensure that they are set up for proper data collection and reporting. So you will hear from us. We will bother you as through emails, phone calls, because it is our response, even though we're not collecting the information personally, and you're not entering that information into HMIS, we are actually responsible to make sure that all of your active programs are entered into Clarity, that they're reflected there. And then we'll get, and we explain it a little bit more as to why it's required in slides further down. But we are responsible to make sure that all those programs are within our system. So that's why if the Google Forms aren't submitted, we do constantly try to email you and ask for that information. So I apologize in advance if we send you more than one email regarding that information. Okay, victim service providers. Victim service providers that are required or, that are recipients or subrecipients under the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, so HUD, COC, and ESG programs are required to collect client-level data consistent with the HMIS data collection requirements. So what ends up happening is you do not use HMIS. You have your own comparable databases. Each agency has their own. They don't talk to each other. The most important thing here is that your comparable databases collect the information required for HUD. So your workflow may look different. The only thing that would be similar is the information that you're all collecting that does need to get reported to HUD. So to protect clients, victim service providers must enter required client level data into their comparable databases. Again, they must comply with HMIS requirements, and you're able to also produce your HUD caper or your APR required by your project type. So again, I said before that each project type does collect different data elements. A lot of them are the same, that we label them as universal data elements because that's something that you should be collecting for every single one of your clients, no matter what project type they're going under. But then you have your project type data elements that are different depending on what program they're eligible for within your agency. So again, these slides are going to go out. Everything is linked, as you can see here. So you'll be able to have that access to those forms if you don't already have them. So just no, and then we can send out the links too. That's not a big deal. Excuse me. So in 2016, HUD mandated that all victim service provider projects be set up in HMIS. And the reason for that is because when it comes down to submitting your caper, submitting your report, you need HMIS project descriptor elements. So essentially what that means is it's asking you for a project name, the operating start date and end date, the project type for the program, your grant identifier, your bed and unit inventory, and the location of your program. So again, because you're victim service providers, you're only required to complete the geocode and the zip code fields for privacy reasons, obviously. Or you can use the mailing or administrative access address too. All right. Each project funded through COC and CHS are part of our statewide reporting that includes the PIT, which is the point in time count, the housing inventory count, and our LSA, which is longitudinal system analysis. If these, again, if your programs are not set up in HMIS, what you need to submit your paper, the project descriptors will not be available. So it's just going to hold up in submitting that your program report. So essentially, this is what the workflow looks like, just a visual representation. If you're required to submit a project request form, you fill that out. We add it to our HMIS. It's not something where anybody else has access to. No other users will be able to see what programs you have. Only system administrators. It's essentially just our team that's able to do that, to see that. So AMIS House cannot see what projects are under your agency, nor can any other participating agency that actually enters in information. So all of that information is closed down. The information that we're asking for in this project setup form really is just, it's behind the scenes to make sure that you have everything when it comes down to when you submit your report. Then victim service providers collect client level data within your own comparable databases, but it is reflective of the HMIS data collection requirements from HUD. You enter that information into your database, and then the HMIS updates any projects, any bidding unit inventory, or any funding changes that you have on your end that also does need to get reported back to our team, so it gets reflected with some clarity. Again, nobody sees that except our team. There's not only is there no information going in, but there's no information that's being entered by our team that anybody else gets to see. Oh, thank you, Christina. Christina sent the link in the chat for the project setup form. Okay, so now we have funding requirements. And this one is, obviously there's funding requirements for COC and CHS, but the specific ones that we're going to talk about are ERA2, YH2P, and SFRS. These are special because they're brand new to us. So funding requirements for ERA2. We've got program eligibility. For those programs, the household income under 80% AMI based on income or self-attestation. So we have, I'm wondering, Christina, if you can add this link too in the chat. They receive federal health insurance subsidy, so for example, Medicaid, or they receive federal entitlement non-cash benefits like SNAP. Their prior living situation defines what homelessness category a client is, and the location is required. The information that we're looking for is at least the town and the zip code. And then we also have the self-attestation and income verification form that we can send over a copy of what it looks like in clarity. But I don't know, Rosa, if you already have one that you'd be able to share out with the group. Thank you. Now for the next one, we have YH2P. So YH2P, is actually still working on finalizing the HMIS elements, but the things that actually that are required to be collected are these here, which is the C3 youth education status. So all transitional housing and all PSH services only other. So these are the program types that need to collect the youth education status. We do ask a sexual orientation question, and then possible elements. Again, they haven't finalized it yet, but these are the possible elements. We're looking at general mental dental health status, pregnancy status, formally award of either child welfare or foster agency, or a juvenile justice system, project completion status, safe and appropriate exit, and of course, annual assessment, which some of you are already familiar with. So again, the YHCP team is still working on finalizing this, but in the meantime, it's definitely this youth education status, the sexual orientation, and the annual assessment. If you are a victim service provider and are funded through YHCP, you do need to stay informed by attending the weekly community learning lesson session. I'm wondering, Christina, if you can put that information in the chat too when they meet, if you can get it off my calendar. But I believe it's Tuesday. Okay. And then the next one is SFRS. So the firing requirements for SFRS, your contract will actually detail the program eligibility for these funded programs. So you want to make sure that you go back to your contracts and confirm what it is that they're asking you to collect, and what it is what program type it is that's being funded under this funding type. The monthly template to be filled out and sent to the help desk. So there's a monthly template. The template is linked here. You fill in the applicable fields, and then you submit it back to our help desk. So please send the report to the help desk. Reports are due to HMIS by 12 noon on the 4th of each month. I'm wondering if someone from our team can put in the HMIS email in the chat, please. So again, all of this is linked. You'll be able to see that here, and it'll open. You'll be able to fill out the fields there, and it's pretty self-explanatory. If you have any questions, that'll be at the end. We have office hours, and we can give that link and everything. Okay, data collection. So I don't mean to give you a flash, but just these are requirements when it comes down to data collection for these funding sources. But now when it comes down to data collection here, it breaks it down a little bit more by the project type, how we mentioned before. So we linked the manual here. It's pretty lengthy, but it's good to take a look at. The universal data elements. So regardless of whether or not, regardless of what program type they're going into, regardless of whether it's all ESG and COC programs, they need to collect these universal data elements. So again, we have templates within Clarity. I don't know what your comparable databases look like, but this is what you want to make sure that your comparable databases are also collecting. So we're looking at name, social security number, date of birth, race, ethnicity, gender, veteran status, disabling condition, project start date, project end date, the destination, their relationship to head of household, their client location, housing move-in date, and living situation. So within our system, some of these are drop downs. There's options for answers. If you're interested in taking a look, we can share, we can set up meetings, and I can share my screen on our training site so you can look to see what the options are for those answers. I think having that visual will help. But again, this is what you want to make sure that your comparable databases are collecting. Please note that the security number, social security number, is required. We have been notified that EmpowerDB does not collect this element, but this is something that does need to be updated within the system to start collecting because it is required by HUB. These next couple of slides, I'm not going to go over one by one, but I do suggest that your team go over them to see to pinpoint the difference between the project types. So this is emergency shelter. You'll be able to see that most of them start off the same, but it's towards the end that they kind of change. So emergency shelter, we look at services only. So you could just see here, this current living situation was not listed in the emergency shelter one. For transitional housing, youth education status wasn't listed in the previous two. And then PH, rapid rehousing, or TSH, excuse me. With the new funding that came out, if you were funded for a joint TH or RH project type, we ask you to please reach out to us through the help desk. This project is not one project within our system. This is actually two projects within our system, which would essentially mean that even though this is the same project funded under the same contract, on our end, we would need it to be reflected within two project request forms. So one for the THP and then one for the rapid rehousing piece. And the reason for that is because this has one bedding unit inventory number, and then this has another bedding unit inventory number. So even though it's the same project, they're funded through the same contract, it needs to be reflected as two within our system. Reporting requirements.
All right, so I'm going to take this section. So we're going to go over the reporting requirements related to the data collection that Maria just went over. So if you want to go to the next slide. So for reporting, COC, ESG, and ESG-CV program recipients are required to submit aggregated program information via Sage HMIS reporting repository. So all HUD-funded VSP recipients must submit data from their comparable database via a CSV import. Next slide. So if we're looking specifically at COC reporting, COC program recipients are required to submit an annual performance report, so an APR, within 90 days from the end of their grant operating year. So again, this APR is going to be generated from your comparable database in that CSV format contained in a zipped file, consistent with the COC APR HMIS programming specifications. And you can actually test this CSV export anytime at the linked website here. So we recommend doing that. COC program recipients can find additional information about COC program reporting requirements, including the SAGE access and submitting an APR in the SAGE COC APR guidebook for COC grant funded programs. So next slide. So now we're going to move over to ESG reporting. So ESG program recipients are required to submit a project level CSV CAPR report to each CSV recipient that funded a project using the date range specified by that recipient. The CAPR is generated by using, again, your comparable database in that CSV form that we love so much, contained within a zipped file, consistent with the program specifications. And again, you can test those CSV export uploads at any time at the website linked here as well. And similar to the last slide, you can find additional information about ESG reporting requirements in the SAGE ESG CAPR guidebook for ESG funded programs. Next slide. So ESG CV. So ESG CV CARES Act, so ESG CV, recipients are required to submit quarterly reports based on ESG CV funded projects. The quarterly reports must include ESG CV CSV CAPR reports generated from the comparable database. So unlike the annual ESG program reporting, the reports for ESG CV will be bundled reports. So an example of that is all shelters funded by a recipient that are in the same comparable database implementation will be in one report, so they're bundled. Additionally, The reports generated by the VSP will be for 2 date ranges. So the first one being the specific quarter being reported on, and the second is like a cumulative period. So grants start to the end of the quarter. Subrecipients must use the same project in the comparable database for the duration of their ESG CV funding. So the VSP must not set up new projects each year. And next slide. So we are going on to PIT requirements.
Thanks, Shayla. So PIT requirements. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Victim service providers are required to fully participate in the statewide point in time count and in the housing inventory count. So the PIT and the HIC, which is conducted by our team annually. So victim service providers will be required to provide aggregated data per project type. So again, we want to make sure that all your projects that are currently active are reflected in HMIS, but also this is another reason why we need to make sure that what we have on our end is accurate, what's actually happening with your agency project. So the aggregated data is going to go by per project, including the number of people served, the demographic and special population data for each. The PIT numbers must be validated, meaning that the number of persons served must be represented in each data set. So if there's 10 people served, then that means whatever we get back there needs to be 10 different ages, genders, races, ethnicities represented with those reports coming back. Additionally, the VSPs will need to provide project level bed and unit inventory, so BUI, for all projects that provide lodging. So the BUI must include the number of beds and the number of units designated for households with only adults and households with children. So victim service providers are responsible to track and provide this information over to our team, and then our team is the one that submits those reports. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with this. I know we've had contact in the past of essentially the PIT and the HIC. But if we go to the next one, a little breakdown of what the bed and unit inventory is. So all projects that provide lodging or rental assistance have an inventory that represents the capacity of the project. So it might not be a definite number, but if it's not a definite number, what we're looking for is either an average of what that number should be, or for when it comes down for the night of the PIT, what it was on that actual night. So I believe last year we did the PIT on 126. So we'll need the count for what it was on that night, 126. Okay, so each inventory contains a start date, which is the date that gets configured that the program started. The end date, if the program is no longer active, a number of beds for each of these subgroups. So we're looking at veterans, youth veterans, or any other person. The number of units. So the number of units, all right, well, let me just read it and then I'll go back. The number of units is generally the same number as the number of households served. So a room in a shelter with 4 beds would be 1 unit in a family shelter, but it serves 4 people within that 1 unit. So 1 unit could have 4 beds for 4 different people if it was a family. Now, if we're looking at for single individuals, it would be 4 units for those 4 beds. So it depends on the makeup, the composition of the family or the household, of how you're going to take a look at how many beds, how many units. So if these beds and units are for families with children under 18 or households without children, you want to keep that in mind when you're reporting back these bed and unit inventories. In an emergency shelter available year-round, seasonal, or overflow, that's how you can identify your bed and unit inventory, or if it's at a facility, or if it's hotel vouchers. So there's ways of labeling what your beds are, whether it's year-round, whether they're hotel vouchers. You're the one that provides that information back to us, and whatever it is that you tell us is what we submit back on that report. The other thing too is that, say at the beginning of the year, the bed and unit inventory is one thing. If there is any significant change on any of these items, we do need it to be reflected within Clarity. So submitting that help desk ticket to our team is very helpful. Again, we want to make sure that when we provide these reports, they're the most updated information that we have. So whenever anything changes, if you could let our team know so we can update that, that would be great. Oh, perfect. This is, yeah, so this is the breakdown. So if it's individuals, the beds are counted the same as units. So 3 beds are the same as 3 units. This also includes couples. So if it comes back to as 3 beds, 3 units, we know that this is, you know, just by looking at it, we would know that this is individuals only. So when it comes down to families, units are counted per family. So if you have a rapid rehousing program and you are in the contract, it's telling you 5 units, but it's a family program, you're serving families, then essentially what we would know is the beds may change because you're not always going to be serving the same number of families. You might have a family of 2, you might have a family of 7. So we are very well aware of that. So just again, when reporting these bed and unit inventories back to us, you want to, you know, make sure that you differentiate between individuals and families. And now we're moving over to CES participation.
Thank you. I do want to mention again that we will have time at the end for questions. I know we're going through a lot. We'll do this portion and then open up the space. In addition to the data collection and reporting elements that we've discussed, requesting and receiving referrals via the statewide coordinated entry system is also a required component for COC, CHF, and YHDP victim service provider partners. Since, as we've touched on, victim service providers are unable to enter client information into HMIS, we have identified an alternative workflow. So next slide. For shelter referrals, an automated email is sent to shelter staff every day with a request to update availability. Those referrals are made then back to that emailed request. I do want to mention here that it is important we have the correct contact information for your case managers who are requesting and receiving referrals. So as your project gets closer to startup or has already started, we'll want to just calibrate on that and keep in touch. So the referrals are not done in HMIS, but through this email process for shelters. We will respond via email with identified referrals. We will not ask for the outcomes of those referrals. We simply send them and you're able to process and do intakes according to eligibility. Victims who do contact our call center are offered and can access either a DV shelter or the homeless shelter system, but they must meet the criteria for either. If they're fleeing domestic violence or they report DV history, we do provide the hotline as a resource as well. There are DV shelters that don't need to fill their beds through our system. So we try to give them all of the information that they can to just synchronize and jointly access both if needed. Victims who are placed in a domestic violence shelter can request that their profile be marked private. That does require an element of access to the system. If you don't have the necessary access to the system to mark clients as private, you can send the CES shelter an email and we can direct you to an alternative contact for that. Moving on to housing, so similar process in terms of developing an alternative workflow. Sorry, Maria, I keep telling you to, I forgot to tell you to skip it. You're good. For housing in particular, so each of our victim service provider partners who are operating housing projects have a shared sheet with our housing referral matcher, the individual responsible for making those matches and referrals. So again, referrals are not done in HMIS. Maria, you can go one more down, please. Not done in HMIS, but via that referral sheet that is shared is how we keep track of eligibility preferences and send those clients your way. The top of each shared Google sheet, Maria could go one more, please, does provide a section with HUD definitions. I do want to mention some housing programs within our system. Permanent housing opportunities are only available for clients who are literally homeless or category 1. So there can at times be confusion with the difference between, like, how to identify category 1 versus category 4. Please make sure that you try to enter them in the correct category as far as the homeless status. If you're not sure, you can always send our referral matchmaker, Hannah, an email. So she's at CES Housing at rihomeless.org. You can also go to CES office hours. That goes for any question at any time about referrals and coordinated entry participation. Every Monday morning from 9:30 to 10:30, our coordinated entry, shelter, and housing staff are available to connect, clarify, and respond. We do make sure each of our victim service providers have a PDF version of our housing assessment as well. That assessment is utilized to prioritize the eligible households for potential housing placements. So after completing that housing assessment and filling in the metrics on that shared Google sheet, these are the metrics to consider at the top of that spreadsheet and to make sure are captured. I do just want to mention, so we've listed them again. If you have any questions, we do constantly try to make ourselves available for that. I think one thing that I do want to mention, undocumented status was part of a community conversation where local providers decided not to capture documentation status for potential client profiles and referrals. We now, however, within our system and within our inventory, have an upcoming rapid rehousing program that focuses on undocumented individuals who are fleeing domestic violence. So we have added a column on each of the partner shared sheets for documentation status, and we'll collect that in order to aid with those referrals. But we've also added a discussion around documentation status and whether or not the community is comfortable consistently capturing that for folks to an advisory committee conversation. So just know that that's happening, but we have at least 4 victim service providers at this point updated the shared Google sheet so that we know, because of that hybrid domestic violence and undocumented status element. Your agency's Google sheet, Maria, next slide, please, will be factored into any and every housing referral decision. So we look at both your Google sheet, I'm sorry, one more down, Maria. We take a look at your shared Google sheet and the housing queue that we have access to. So we're looking at every potential client in the system and external to our system whom you're serving and identifying. And we're looking at domestic violence status, and we're looking to identify who has the highest housing assessment score, who indicates the most severe vulnerability and highest risk, and that's the referral that we're making. Final slide in this section is, again, just a reminder that coordinated entry team is available every single week for a full hour. You don't have to let us know you're coming. You can. And if you have a specific question that you want us to focus on that you're not sure whether or not it's an easy question, you can come, you can send it beforehand, and we can plan to touch on it during that time. Whatever works, we will just always be available. via that link. I do want to mention as well that there is a domestic violence case conference meeting that happens every month. The date and time of that has been in flux for a few months, but we're working with the facilitators to reinitiate that meeting. That will be an opportunity to discuss the potential housing barriers for clients that you're working with and maybe strategize in case conference with other providers on that. It's also going to be a space in which our housing referral matchmaker will bring, as far as she's aware, kind of the top scoring individuals for upcoming potential referrals so that we can spend some time being a little bit strategic about housing barriers or intervention points for them as well. Again, that is in flux, so I don't unfortunately have a next date and time to share. We will plan to share that out once we do have one, but you can also email me directly for details. And that takes it back to key takeaways. I'll bounce it to Maria.
Thank you. Okay, so key takeaways. The HMIS lead is responsible to make sure that you are collecting and reporting your data properly. So again, we stress that your comparable databases are reflective of what the HUD data standards are. If there's any questions when it comes down to that, please let us know. We can break things down, send over slides, do one-on-one, anything to make it easier for you. Our team is there to help. Victim service providers are required to submit these new project setup forms to reflect active projects. One of the things that we've identified in the past years is you don't have to constantly keep submitting them every year. So if you have a program that started last year and you submitted a form, you do not need to resubmit that form this year if the funding was extended or if it was renewed. Once it's in there and it's active, the only other time we need to update it is if it ends or if there's any updates when it comes down to funding or vetting unit inventory. If it's all the same, there's no need to resubmit a new one. It's a one-time thing. Again, we only want to know if it ends or if it's been updated to reflect it properly within the system. If you are funded for a joint TH or TH-RRH project type, please connect with us. Again, this requires 2 of these forms to be submitted, not just one, and this is the only time that, as of right now, this is the only time where you would need to submit 2 of those forms for this project type. All other project types are just one project setup. And finally, the victim service providers, data collection and system reporting requirements training. Oh wait, this is not it. This must have been less. Please ignore this one. This must have been less than the last time. So I apologize for that. But yes, so it's just these 3 takeaways. Okay, and I thank you, Christina. I saw that you submitted on the chat the HMIS office hours. If you're like starting to do the new project setup forms and you have questions on it, feel free to come to those hours. We'll be able to walk you through it. We could do it right then and there. Again, just like what Rebecca said for the CES office hours, you don't need to tell us you're coming. You can just show up. We can do the breakaway rooms where it'll just be one of us. If there's nobody there, you'll have the whole team to yourself. Okay, and again, these slides are going out. They're all of the links are live, so you'll be able to have this resource slide. I think it's easier if you'll be able to just have these when it comes down to looking at your program when you're setting up your comparable database. Hopefully they're already set up, but just in case they're not, these links will be able to help you to see what's required and what isn't. Some of the elements are repeated through the program, some of them are not. So it'll be helpful for you. And then next step, Yes.
Yep, I can just mention, so we will be sending out a memo that consolidates several of the steps from new project setup through coordinated entry participation and access. So as we plan to send out the slides, and like Maria said, there will be live links. We will do what we can to put all of the information in a memo for you for reference.
Thank you. And that's all we had for you. Are there any questions? I don't think any questions came in through the chat, but we'll take this time to see if anybody wants to ask anything.
Will a link to this recording be sent out via email?
Yes. The link, it usually takes it's less than 24 hours, but we say 24 hours just in case. So it'll be sent out once we send these slides out.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, yes. If there is, that's a good point. If there is anyone you want to receive the slides or the recording or want to be added to the Google group, I believe we created one, or someone needs to be taken off, or they don't need to be on that in that Google group, let us know and we can update that as well.
So I was just checking the Empower database and I did not see a location where we would put like the social security numbers. Does anybody know? Or I am fairly new to the database, so I wasn't sure if there's somewhere else where we could just put it.
Empower doesn't allow us to do it just yet. There's a lot of discussion around that, Christina. So we got to get clarity on where we're going.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? And then again, you might have questions out. It was a lot of information. If there's any questions after this, feel free to email us, whether it's Rebecca's team or our team or the CS team or the HMIS team. We'll be able to, either do the help desk, the office hours, I'm sorry, or a one-on-one like this to take a look at what your agency needs specifically. But that's it. That's all I have. I don't know if Rosa or Elizabeth, do you want to say anything? No? Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for coming. We'll send these out as soon as I get this upload up, I'll send these slides out. So thanks everyone.